correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm Steve, and I'm the only Steve here tonight. The other Steve actually, his internet provider hates you and doesn't want you to hear him because they scheduled some sort of work something outage deal that means he has no internet to be able to get on this call and record and all that, whatever. But I have a guest for this evening, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But before that, I want to take a minute, just remind you all, Gamer Nation Con is coming up April 4th through the 10th, I believe. The weekend following April 4th, anyway. Plano, Texas, which is Dallas suburbs, little place called Dallas Games Marathon. It's a podcast put on by the D20 Radio Network. Be a bunch of us podcast hosts from around the network there, running games, playing games. We also get access to I think it's 3,000 plus board game titles in the library of the store to use the whole weekend. It is quite honestly the best little convention I can imagine. It honestly feels less like a convention and more like a reunion of a college gaming club, except there's like 150, 200 people there. And, there's everything getting run. This year we've got a Lord of the Rings kind of theme going on. People are running One Ring, a lot of Genesis, Star Wars, some D&D. I'm running Men in Black with the Tolkien theme. It is just little bits of all kinds of wonderful gaming goodness. So if you're interested in that, I'll put a link to the tabletop events site for the convention down in the show notes. Yeah, I know at this point it's a week away, but it is really, really a good time, and I will heartily recommend to anyone, if you can make the trip, it's worth it. All right, so that being said, this week we do have actually a returning guest. We're going to welcome back Doug from Gaming Ballistic, who has some cool new stuff to tell us about, and then we're going to do the Me and Steve thing and kind of see where conversation takes us.
Well, being a sort of an indie publisher working out of my basement and mostly alone, getting the opportunity to speak with another human being, even real time, even digitally, is fraught with peril with me because I like to talk about stuff. So, but no, anyway, thank you for having me on, and thank you for having me back. I appreciate the opportunity to chat gaming, and an evening chatting gaming and drinking a little bourbon is a good evening.
That's what I forgot. Oh, darn. Oh, well.
Do you have minions or spawn that you could send fetching?
No. I'm actually out of liquor at the moment. I drink occasionally. It's more one of those where it's not that I stopped drinking, I just don't do it that often.
Sure.
Scotch is my preferred whiskey, though.
I was a big Scotch guy for a long time, and then I got turned on to bourbon by somebody. I don't remember who, but I was like, oh, this is nice. I liked it. And I also do a little, occasionally have attempted to cook with it, like a bourbon glaze for scallops and stuff. And so the caramelly taste to it is something that
There was a place down the road from me for a while that did occasionally it was like a chef's special plate that was a bourbon glazed pork chops and roasted Brussels sprouts.
Okay, I'm with you on the pork chops.
Really good. Like, I'm not a huge Brussels sprouts fan, but like they had the glaze on them and everything.
Yeah.
And it was like a pan roasted with the glaze. It was really good.
Okay. But yeah, anyway, it's looking forward to getting into 2024. 2023 sucked.
Not as bad as 2020.
I believe that is correct. Well, in general, for most of life, that is true. From a very narcissistic, am I feeding myself with my business perspective? 2020 was okay. It was my first year. I got laid off in the middle of 2020, and so the last half of 2020 was my first bit saying, I agreed with my wife that I was going to try and make Gaming Ballistic my only job. and run it as an independent business. And then 2021, I seem to recall, was pretty good. And I can't remember if it was 2021 or 2022 where I was like, "Oh, this is great. I've made some money, and so I'm gonna, not a ton, but I was significantly profitable." And I was like, "Oh, this is great, blah blah blah." And then I was like, "But I'm gonna retain this money in my business rather than pay myself so that could increase the pace of ongoing operations." And the federal government said, "Yeah, no, no, that's not how that works at all." And my bad, right? If you don't know the rules, the tax rules of the business you're going into, but it was one of those things where they're like, "I'll take a third of that, or thereabouts." And so I wound up writing the feds in the state $20,000 or $25,000 worth of oops. And so I've been more careful with that since.
That would definitely not be pleasant.
Yeah. So and then there were a few other things that happened that have snowballed, and the discretionary income has dried up quite a bit over the last couple of years.
Well,
And yeah, right. So the post-COVID, where's the money? It's certainly not in third-party RPG products, unless you're one of the lucky few.
well, I recall someone at some point that when I was talking to on the podcast telling me that someone gave them advice when they got into this business, and they said, "You want to know the best way to make $1 million in RPGs? Start with 2."
That might have been me, because I've used that line too. The very first time that I heard that was about aviation. That the best way to make a small fortune as a designer and builder of airplanes, especially for the military, was to start with a much larger fortune and work your way down. And that is correct, and that's actually how I got into it when I wrote my fantasy heartbreaker, Dragon Heresy, which is something that I started with. There's a story there that we can revisit if you want. But anyway, when I started writing it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this and finally kickstart it, and I did that in 2018 or 2019 or thereabouts. I didn't care what I spent on it. My wife was making, had a good job. I had a good day job, and so I was like, hey, if I spend $10,000 on a print run, which was about the for a 288-page book, that's not many books. Anyway, if I spent 10 grand on a print run, and I didn't care, right? That was the minimum order quantity, and that was what it was. And shipping was less, but it was still substantial. So it worked out to be. It wound up being like it was like a great example where I look back and say, super rookie mistake, because I was like, how could I not sell through 1,000 or 1,500 books? It really shouldn't be. The long tail will just take care of that. I'd only have to sell some handful, and they'll all be gone in a year or two anyway. So I wound up saying, oh well, the marginal cost of these books is so low, I might as well get 1,500 instead of 1,000. And yeah, that didn't work out for me as well. I still have 900 of them in a warehouse in Tennessee or something like that. And the funny thing is that the only thing that keeps them in Tennessee is the fact that I'm not being charged for the storage, and I wouldn't have room for 90 boxes of books in a otherwise pretty large house. Right? That is a significant fortification. 90 boxes of 10 books of 10 hardcover space.
I don't know what his print run was, but I do know because I saw him post the pictures. Chris Spivey on the initial print run of Haunted West did the initial distribution out of his garage.
Okay, yep.
And he showed pictures of the pallets of books in his garage.
Yeah. No, and I don't know how many he has to fulfill, but it gets, depending on what the book is, it gets, I think the most that I've ever fulfilled out of my house was a Kickstarter that did 600 people, which probably means 400 books. I think the Saethor's Bane, the one that I'm doing right now, was just shy of 600, and I will probably order about 400 books and fulfill about 325, and I'll do that out of my house.
Mm-hmm. Well, to give you perspective, because I don't know if
Yeah.
you've ever seen that book in person.
Oh my goodness, that is champions level stuff. That's like 2 inches right there.
Yeah, it's 780 some pages.
Wow, that's a book, all right.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever shot it with a gun? Somebody did it with one of the later the editions of Champions, and it stopped it. I think it was they started at 22 and they worked their way up, but there were a couple rounds that it would stop.
I there would be a technically perfectly fine way to test that, but I don't, as much as like I having interviewed Chris a couple of times, I don't think he would take kindly to that, just even though it's being done as an experiment.
I mean, no approbation towards the product. It's just a lot of paper. It's both a doorstop and armor, right? I mean, there aren't too many games that qualify for an improved armor class.
Well, and Chris has actually said, the one time we had him on, he said he will not ever authorize that as a print on demand. He said because the paper stock that they use, it would literally be,
you couldn't do it.
4 inches thick.
No, that's right. Books like that require not just a very educated decision on paper, but you really, 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 really need to sew that binding. I would never, and not all, but most print on demand is just glued. It's not glued and stitched. It's not Smith sewn, or Smith sewn. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but it's not sewn, and you need that to be sewn. I had this is not my thickest book, but it's my second hardcover, Dragon Heresy being my first, and this is about 200 pages, and it's sewn binding in 100-pound paper. And people like the print on demand that I do. It's not really print on demand. It's short run printing through Mixam, and they have fantastic paper selection. So you can get. I almost always order 100-pound, 150 GSM matte coated paper, and it makes it. The books are tangibly more fun to page through, and you never bleed through, right? And even if you have a dark piece of art, it's not going to interfere with what's on the back.
Yeah.
All sorts of things that I didn't ever think that I would need to know as in my prior life as a materials engineer.
The fun things you can get, the rabbit holes you could go down in gaming, right?
Oh yeah,
they're related.
No, absolutely, and that was my whole thing with sort of Viking style sword and shield fighting started because of a design question. I was like, I just feel like +2 to armor class sells shields short. Like, God, I feel like after maybe a helmet and a spear, the first thing that you picked up for like the better part of 1,000 years was a shield, and it just seemed like almost anybody would rather take in a D&D game, for example. Almost everybody would rather take 2 weapons because an extra 1d6 or 1d8 or whatever, doubling your chance of whacking a guy before he can whack you is just a better decision than +2 to armor class because it's really only a 10% swing. And I was like, that just doesn't seem right to me. I could be right, but I'd never used a shield. I'd done martial arts for years, but only unarmed stuff. And you put weapons in people's hands, and life is different.
Done a very limited amount of padded boken sparring,
right? But
just for fun. But
yeah, but you put weapons in people's hands, and it's different, and it's different in some very surprising ways to what my unarmed combat training and experience, limited though it may be. I mean, I did it for years and years and years, but it's I was not a bouncer, I was not a brawler, right? I was not out on the street using it in a way that I could be like, oh well, the 4, 10, 50 fights that I got into and blah blah blah. But weapon combat is different in a lot of ways, because if I'm getting into a fight with somebody and I'm unarmed, the human body is not a naturally deadly instrument. We use it poorly usually for the cause, right? For the thing. And so, generating all that power in order to deliver an effective blow requires some technique and some wind up and the right focus and whatever. With a weapon, especially an edged weapon on a stick, you have a lot of leverage and a lot of power multiplication. And so the thing that kills is minimum motion and maximum speed. But you don't necessarily. I mean, humans are fragile when it comes to edged stuff. So you don't necessarily have to kill the hell out of somebody. You can just kill them the right amount. And so the motions are a lot smaller because they don't need to be big when you're dealing with, especially the style of combat that I'm doing, which is presumably mostly unarmored because the Vikings were a metal poor society. And the way that we were using the sword and shield was very, very different. Very active shield use. My shield is upstairs, but I think it's in my trunk actually. But very active shield use. You basically grapple with it. You're moving it around, and your sword is mostly a secondary defending thing until you do enough with the shield and your footwork and whatever to strike true, and then you're done, right? I mean, you don't, and even if you don't kill the other person, right? If, they're done. They're gonna decide. They're gonna nope out basically, and you see that a lot in if you can find them. And I don't necessarily suggest you go look because they're horrible. But when you see people like street fighting with machetes, it's not what you see in movies. It's a lot of dancing around the edge. It's a lot of swinging. And so you look at that and say, oh, that's why they fought all day in the Battle of whatever in 1022 or whatever. Because, you look at movies or you look at role-playing games, and you look at contrived, and I don't mean contrived fake. You put two people in a rope cage and say, go beat the hell out of each other, stuff happens, right? But even in MMA, when you have equal weight classes and equal whatever, it's usually the first person who either gets lucky or makes a mistake that's so subtle that it's not even a mistake. But that's even more true when you're dealing with a sharp sword or something.
Well, that's like I've
So,
tried to explain to people just for purposes of envisioning it in role playing games that you say make an attack roll, and so in look, I'll bet you almost all of us do it. Well, I'm going to take a swing. No,
right,
what that attack roll represents is
a lot of things.
in the case of D&D, because it's the one everyone knows, right? That 15 seconds.
Sure. Right.
That's your chance of getting a meaningful poke
Exchange
during
right,
that 15 seconds. It's this
right.
dance of pushing and shoving and footwork and everything. And
Right.
so we oversimplify it because that's how our brains work and it's what we've seen in movies. But that's why that.
Yeah. In fairness, though, and this is actually one of the reasons why Dragon Heresy got started, is that I've been playing one way or another since 1980 or so. I think 80, 81. I think my introduction was my relatively wealthy friend Howard had the AD&D books, and when Howard introduced me to D&D and we would play. Uh, he was the DM and I was playing and whatever. And then I was like, oh, I want this, and so I got the red box, the basic set. I think that was Holmes or was that Menser? I think it was Holmes. It came in the box with the orange dice, and I still have some of those dice 40 years later. Anyway, point was that from that moment until roughly yesterday, it was always roll to hit. Oh, you cut into blah blah blah, and the bright blood flows, and the enemy is dismayed and overcome. It was never you've made them nervous enough that their hit points are lower. They're slightly out of position and they have to recover. Right. It's because D&D relies on hit point ablation before the final blow is struck, and now you're rolling for death saves or just dead. And if you're in the OSR game, but because D&D is based around hit point ablation, in order to keep it interesting, and the mechanics say this as well. It's like, oh, by the way, this is abstract, but it's written like it's not abstract, and it's mostly played like it's not abstract. And so I think people can be easily forgiven for saying, oh, well, I just got shot at with an arrow 462 times, 100 of them hit, but that's okay. I'm a barbarian with 600 hit points, so I'm all good here. And what's your I'm Boris the Hedgehog now, because that's what I look like. So it's even though you look on page 82 of the old Gygaxian DM guide, and they're like, yeah, that's not how it works. But in everywhere else except that like one passage, that's exactly how it works. And Dragon Heresy actually was now I take credit for inventing it. I don't take credit for it as a unique invention because others have done it. I just was not aware. But I have a separate wounds and vigor track where when you take wounds, you are bleeding, and if you take a certain number of wounds, you may die, and if you took a certain number of wounds, you automatically die. And like even like the famous 20th level barbarian with 300 hit points, and he rages, and so it's 600 equivalent because they're resistant to everything. The way that it works in Dragon Heresy is that same barbarian can never have more than what is it? Constitution 24 plus 7 for strength, so 31. So 31 wounds, and you start and you're dead at 31, and you're risking unconsciousness at half that. So if you look at a typical 2d6 plus 5 or 2d6 plus 4 great sword or an axe or whatever, and you roll a critical, you are always one blow away from getting wiped. Now, your hit points are your endurance, your defenses, your footwork, and in my mind, at least, and this is why I did, fantasy heartbreaker, right? Like D&D, but better. But in my mind, when I did that, it rationalized the mechanic side, and it made short rests make sense. And action surges and getting more hit points was, oh, I'm going to double down on my vigor. I'm going to get serious about this, or I'm going to not be scared of getting cut. So you take a 15 or 20-minute short rest, and your hit points come back, not because you're not bleeding anymore, because the wounds don't come back for days, but your hit points, your vigor comes back because you've had a chance to get out of combat and shake off whatever, right? You get to start over again. So I did that, and then I rationalized, and I'm not the only one who did that. I guess that was an optional rule in the back of one of the Pathfinder editions. I think there was a Star Wars game that did some kind of injury and vigor. Not the West. It was a D20 based Star Wars game.
Okay, one of the ones, the WotC era.
Yeah. That did wounds versus vigor of some sort of thing, and they may have called it something else, the stress track or whatever. So I don't claim that I did it first. I don't even claim that I did it best, but I did it, and it was my idea, and the mechanics of it were all me. Influence from GURPS, because I've been a GURPS gamer the longest. And GURPS is sort of famous for, you have defense rolls instead of hit points. Your hit points are all meat points. If you get hit, you're cut, you're bleeding, you're injured, your leg is broken, whatever. You have active defenses. So if you swing a sword at me, I roll to block it with my shield, or I roll to parry it with my sword, or I roll dodge to step out of the way. And each of those things has different implications for what you do. And so I didn't. If I wanted to play GURPS, I would play GURPS, or the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game. I don't need to do that to D&D. So I wanted to keep the one roll mechanic, but I wanted to embrace the difference between vigor and wounds, and what I call the threat DC, which is a blow good enough to. Threat DC is basically like 10 plus your dex bonus, or your bonus from a shield, which just makes you harder to worry. Like, you need to have a better hit to bypass a +2 or +3 or +4 from a shield, or like +6 for a tower shield. You needed a lot to get past that. And then there was the hit DC, which if you rolled over the hit DC, you went right to wounds. So you could have the barbarian or the high level fighter there with 200 hit points or whatever, with strength 14 and constitution 14. So they'd have 16 wounds, and you lay 8 or 10 wounds past the hit points, and they're going down. So I mean, you could, and so this does a lot, right? It explains a thief sneak attack, because the sneak attack bypasses surprise attacks, bypass vigor completely. You're just sticking a knife in somebody or whatever, right? So okay, yeah, you understand why a thief or an assassin can sneak attack somebody, bypass all their hit points, and they're just done. Right? That's the proxy for the old school assassinate ability of the assassin class in OSE, for example. But you could always spend a reaction, because I thought reactions were cool. And Pathfinder did this too. Pathfinder 2nd edition did this after I did, but obviously the development was being done while I was writing Dragon Heresy. But using the shield to take a blow as a reaction is a fantastic, simple mechanic. But if you do that, then obviously the shield takes the blow. If you don't, you can do what I call the frantic defense, is you can absorb a hit that would normally go right to your wounds and your hit points anyway, by accepting twice, like double accepting, like you hit me for 10 hit points or 10 wounds. I could say, no, I don't want to do that. I'll soak that by taking 20 vigor. and so it's a lot more vigorous to a lot more stress because they've gotten past your footwork, they've gotten past your defense. The only thing that's between you and death is your armor, and I had armor subtracting point damage reduction in 5e terms rather than increasing your armor class. So yeah, so the difference between your threat DC and your hit DC mostly had to do with your proficiency. Right?
Okay.
So if you were more proficient with your weapons, that was your defense, and so the difference between my footwork and my parry and skill and all that stuff would go up with level, and there was the difference there was that's where skill came in and leveling up and stuff like that. So it plays well, right? As far as fantasy heartbreakers go, it's pretty playable. I had originally written like 400,000 words of setting and rules and covered level 1 through 20, and then I was going to go to Kickstarter with this, and I got some advice from Kevin Crawford, who's like, "You are high if you think that 1,000 people are going to come to a no-name person who's never published anything and shell out 100 or 150 bucks for 3 books that." By all rights, I don't know who you are. It doesn't matter who you are based on your reputation, which is nothing, really. You've got a couple of articles for Steve Jackson Games and one little book that somebody else published. I don't know who you are, but as far as your record in publishing goes, I have no expectation that you'll ever be able to pull this off, right? Despite the fact that you routinely invent and develop physics altering equipment at $6 million a pop or whatever it was that I did in my day job. Nobody knows or cares about that, nor should they, right? You've got
Right.
nothing in your resume that suggests I should trust you with my money. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And so I published Dungeon Grappling. I pulled the grappling system out of because grappling systems have almost always sucked, and I've come up with a couple different variants of that don't suck. So I pulled that out and I published it as Dungeon Grappling, and that's probably through my publishing life my best seller ever. It's an alternate grappling system that really returns grappling to the same set of abstractions as sword combat. Roll a 1d20 plus a bonus against an armor class. If you hit, you roll damage, and that damage has a type control, right? And the more control you get relative to the creature's strength, the more bound up they are. End of story, right? So that's cool, and it works, and it has implications, and it makes it more fun, and you can spend some of that control to add hit points to a damage blow or whatever. Anyway, so that worked out really well. I was able to run that Kickstarter. It was my first project. On time, on budget. I didn't make money, but I didn't lose money, and it's pretty, right? I started to build an art team and whatever. But eventually I said, I do want to do this Dragon Heresy thing. And I was like, but I don't think, based on what Kevin told me and my experience to that point, I'd published a few books. Like, I don't have an audience that's going to support 800 printed pages or whatever it was going to be of the equivalent of a player's handbook, a DM guide, and a monster manual. So I cut it down by 2/3. I said, I'm going to publish level 1 through 5. I'm going to take out some classes. I'm going to shrink the bestiary. I'm gonna, nobody cares about your backstory. Nobody cares much about your world building either. So I just had, right, because most people are going to take whatever it is that you do and do their own thing with it. So having thousands or tens of thousands of words about, oh, here's my intricately planned, not exactly Norse, but not exactly not setting. Yeah, whatever. So it was a lot of humble pie, but the project was successful, and I learned a lot, and I didn't make I lost a ton of money on it, but that wasn't my goal, right? At the time,
Mhm.
I just wanted a big, beautiful hardcover book that I could say ta-da, and I got that, but I probably lost 20 grand on in the process.
Well, but I mean, it sounds to me like basically what Kevin was telling you was, look, it's not, he wasn't telling you your work is not good enough to do this. That's not at all what he was
No,
saying.
no, he didn't say that at all. He said
No one knows your work is good enough for this.
that's correct. That's correct. Absolutely. Yeah, and he was blunt. He's like, "Look, I do what I do because I was out there for a long time doing it, and I established my reputation, and I've got a mailing list of this is 5, 6, 7 years ago. I quaver to think of what his mailing list is now, but it was 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people at the time that he was talking to me, right? If he
Mhm.
tapped 1% of that, and if you look at it, his projects don't tap even 1% of that mailing list, right? I mean,
Mhm.
60,000, 6,000. Oh, no, wait, no, 6,000,
Well, what was his last
maybe
big one? Cities
10%.
Without Number?
Yeah, something like that. So maybe he taps 3 to 5%, but he's certainly not tapping 10% or 50%. Like my mailing list is like 3,000 people, and that probably or 4,000 people, and that probably includes a thousand game stores who never open my mails, right? Because they're flooded with stuff, and why go indie when you could just buy from Watsy or whatever. So practically speaking, if I'm getting 500 backers from a 3,000 person mailing list or a 2,000 person mailing list, I'm doing really, really well,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm getting 25 to 30% hit rate, which is phenomenal for a mailing list. I mean, if you had a 30,000 person mailing list and you were tapping a third of that, that's a 10,000 backer Kickstarter. I mean, that's legendary, which really tells you how terribly successful Kelsey was with Shadow Dark with 14,000 backers. I mean, that is crazy town. Now, having looked at Shadow Dark, it's deserved. It combines the elegant design of old school essentials, sort of one page layouts, with her sensibilities are. If you ever hear her talk about gaming, that woman has studied. She has played, she has talked, and she has studied. She knows her stuff backwards and forwards, and is very comfortable discussing constructively the design pros and cons of almost anything, and not just in the D&D space. So she took best known methods from a lot of places and put it into her love letter to that community, and it shows. And the community rewarded her for it. I would be self-sustaining and very happy with a tenth of that success on a regular basis. If I could get into that 1,000 to 2,000 backer range on my stuff, I would be over the moon. And not just because yay money, although there is some of that. It's because once you get to that point, you can parallel process more projects,
Mm-hmm.
because there are things that like I don't have to say, oh well, I'm going to pay. Like David Pulver wrote some stuff for me recently, the Isle of Cedra, which I kickstarted first with the Fantasy Trip, and then I kickstarted as Old School Essentials. I have one of the books right here, actually. Here's uh, yeah. So here's the OSE versions of this. So here's the Cedra source book.
Okay.
The Isle of Cedra, A5 format, 172 pages. But it's a setting. It's a relatively small island, and it's got a lot of hooks and stuff. There are no obvious good guys. There's no obvious bad guys. It's just a bunch of factions going after each other for Old School Essentials. There's Monster Hunter Belladonna, which is a solo adventure, and then the Scorpion Labyrinth is a relatively short GM'd adventure, which I participated. I like when I do play testing. I tend to do blind testing. I'll get some of my Patreon subscribers or other volunteers to come on board, and I give them the draft, and it's usually text complete and edited, but the art isn't always there. Anyway, so what I tend to do is I'll blind test it. I'll give it to some of my groups and say, do this without me, so that I'm not putting my thumb on the scale of, oh, I'll make this ruling or I'll smooth this over or whatever, right? If there's a question in the book or the rules, or if it's written badly, I need to know. And the best way for me to know is to not be there.
Right.
And so I get the stuff blind tested. But I was actually a participant in the fight test for the Old School Essentials conversion of the Scorpion Labyrinth, and that was eye opening. That was a lot of fun. We did it. First time we did it, we Leroy Jenkins it, and we just scattered and attacked, and it was ghouls, and we just got our butts absolutely kicked, just TPK'd, because nobody was mutually reinforcing, and we weren't focusing fire, and so each of us was fighting our own thing. And you get hit by a ghoul, paralyzed, you're done, right? I mean, yeah, you get a saving throw, but every individual attack that hits causes a new saving throw. It's really just a matter of time before you're paralyzed and eaten. And so they're not a lot of hit dice and not a lot of hit points. They don't even necessarily do a lot of damage, but that paralysis save, man, they punch above their weight class. And so we went in just Leroy Jenkins again and just got kicked. And then we're like, oh, let's try the okay, reset. We're dead. Reset. Let's do it again, and let's see if we can do this a little more tactically intelligently. And we did it, and we reduced them to nothing. We just absolutely why. Some luck, but boy, it makes a big difference when you have a ghoul with claw bite paralysis. Every ghoul that you kill takes away 3 potential chances for them to do unto you before you can do unto them.
Right.
And so that knocking down the potential to even roll the dice was the key element of strategy. But it said, yes, okay, this is a, boy, I hate to use the B word, but I'm gonna. This is a balanced scenario. And when you are publishing material that has a level rating on it, and you are expecting people to pay you for a module, and you say it's level 1 to 3, or say it's level 3 to 5, or whatever, it needs to be those things legitimately. And if the answer is, ha ha, it's too hard, run away, that's not going to sit well with people. You can do that in your own campaign, but if you spent 5 or 10 or 20 or $30 on something, and the first encounter just gets you steamrolled, and there's no way to avoid the first encounter because it's written poorly, then the publisher and the author have done you a disservice in selling that to you and taking your money. So I wanted it to be something where if you approached the fights cannily, you could win in the level range that was appropriate.
Right.
The other thing that we learned very quickly is that a magic user made a great 5th PC, but not a very good 4th PC.
Fair.
Right? You really wanted some meat shields and some people who weren't one-hit wonders, who could cast that one spell and then they were done, or stabby, right? But you really wanted, a paladin and a fighter and a cleric, definitely the cleric for the turn undead, right? That was actually something we also did. Is we did one where we said, "Oh, we turn undead." It's an I win button, and so we did test that where we said, "Okay, we're going to let the cleric turn undead," and she did, and it was successful. And then we talked about it. We're like, well, is that okay? That it's an I win button versus undead. And we're like, absolutely, that's what they do, right? The cleric exists to turn bad guys of certain hit die levels, undead bad guys, fiends and undead or whatever, of certain hit dice into non-problems. Right,
Right.
I wave my holy symbol, and you turn into a pillar flame, and you turn into a pillar flame, and you run away, and oh crap, you didn't, right? And that lets you know that they are big, they are bad, and they are more unholy than thou art holy. And so you better gird your loins and go get them. But that was okay too, right? That there was a way to attack that through brute force, clever brute force. You could potentially attempt to turn undead, but you had a backup plan that you could fight. And if you just Leroy Jenkins it, you were going to get the floor wiped with you in that particular fight. And we tried all the different fights and adjusted them here and there, and a little more armor here, a little else there. So it was cool, and that is actually what I just like yesterday got the new Saethor's Bane solo adventure, which is the first official solo adventure for the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game published by GURPS. Which, given Steve's predilections, he even said to me in an email, he's like, I don't know why we haven't done one, but we haven't. So I'm glad that this is going to exist because they're big into solos. The Fantasy Trip was a huge venue for choose your own style solo adventures, and they've been some of my best sellers in the Fantasy Trip. But I was like, hey, what if I brought not only the same solo that's done so well, Dark Lord's Doom is what it's called. Do I have that here? No. But what if I took the Dark Lord's Doom solo and really leaned into it? Because GURPS has a lot more moving parts than OSE or the Fantasy Trip. But I published the writing of someone I contracted with because I've interacted with Kevin for a long time, and he's simply better than me at simplifying GURPS character generation and really understanding the power of every individual spell ability, and he does it through simplicity rather than complexity. I know some other people who are very versed in the system and can do some very, very complicated things, but Kevin is like he's like the MMA of GURPS character gen, right? A bit of Muay Thai, a bit of Jiu-Jitsu, a bit of boxing, and just enough that you have everything that you need to kick, to punch, to grapple, and to defend, and not a bit more. The thing about GURPS that makes it difficult is not the play experience. And I will defend that unto the death because it is true. The problem with GURPS is that the maximum system mastery required is when you are making a character. You need to know the most about the rules and how they interact and what combat is like and what out of combat is like and what a point means, because it's not value, it's agency, right? If you have a 200 points, it's a point buy system, and if you have 200 points to spend, you have 200 points worth of choices. And not all choices are created equal depending on the campaign, right? The
Right.
classic joke is you can have a 300 point accountant who's just going to get shot to death by some 25-point thug in the first round of combat because he's got 300 points of finance foo, right? And you can't spreadsheet the gang member to death. He may die of boredom, but he's not going to die of anything else. And so what we did is we wrote this and published this thing called Delvers to Grow, which takes all of the rules mastery and packages it for you. So you say, oh, I'm going to play a character of a certain capability level. So am I going to be a strong basis, a fast basis, or a smart basis? And what that is your fighty types, your thiefy, swashbucklery, martial artsy types, and your spellcasters, right?
Mhm.
And you could do the same thing more or less from a D&D perspective. Are you strength based? Are you dex based? What's your spell casting stat, right?
Right.
Charisma, IQ, wisdom, whatever. But it's where are you leaning in? And GURPS does multi-classing very easily and nicely if you want to, but or multiple professions to use the vernacular. The point is that it says if you're going to build a competent, functional, reasonably covers their niche in their chosen role, you're going to need certain things. And those things are common. And then we're going to add on to them the special sauce for a knight or a holy warrior or a wrestler or what's the fourth profession on the beat the hell out of you barbarian. All right, those are the four strong delver professions. And so then you're like, okay, well, now we're going to give you two choices for effectively what you might call feat packages. One of them is even called fifth level fighter. And if I say, oh, if you take the fifth level fighter package, what do you think it brings you? What do you think?
I'm gonna say you're at that kind of second tier of fighterdom.
Right, but what does it mean? What's the most exciting thing about becoming a fifth level fighter?
Okay, it's been a long time since I played D&D, but that means the second attack.
Attack and attack. So, and that's exactly what it does. We called it fifth level fighter, even though GURPS doesn't have levels. Because when you hear fifth level fighter, you're like, ooh, I get an extra attack. Well, that's exactly what it is. It's 25 points for an extra attack. And there are other things like, weapon, master of weapons or arms master or whatever. Arms master is a weapons talent that makes you better at swinging anything you want to, right? But we tried to use natural language and we chunked them together so that you can basically. I've made 30 characters in 10 minutes apiece for a convention pre-gen the day before. People who have never played the game are rolling dice at the table with a functional, well-rounded character in between 30 and 45 minutes. Once you've done it once, you can do it again in 20 to 30 minutes, no problem. It takes a little longer if you're a spellcaster, but we packaged up the equipment into loadouts. We packaged up the characters, so you make about like 6 choices, and then you're rolling dice. Because the goal was, well, we have OSR, we have 5th edition D&D, we have TFT, and all of those games, even Pathfinder, getting to the table at first level is relatively fast. Unless you want to be all angsty about your backstory and stuff, you can basically roll a few dice, slap down a few things, and be killing goblins and taking their stuff within an hour of sitting down around the table. And for GURPS and powered by GURPS in the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game, it was usually weeks because the game master would want to sit together first with the group and talk about what kind of game you're going to play, and then you'd go off and design the character, and then you'd come back and you talk about it more, and then you have the first intro session, whatever. But so many games died before they even got started because it was just too much runway. I don't know if you've ever been on international flight in some of the airports in the Far East, but these airports are the size of freaking countries. And so you're like, oh yeah, you push back from the gate at noon, but you're taxiing for an hour, right? And you're just ready to get blindingly drunk by the time you're actually lifting off from the runway because the flight is shorter than the taxi. That actually happened to me once. I was taking off from Singapore airport and flying to Penang, Malaysia, and I was taxiing because the Singapore airport is huge. I was taxiing for about as long as the total flight time, which was about 40 minutes.
Oh
Because
wow.
I was on a big, fast airplane. It was a relatively new at the time 777, massive, long airplane operated by Singapore Airlines. But you roll down the runway, you lift off, you rocket up. They let the drink cart go. It rolls down like 700 feet of airplane because it's the long 777s are big. They're lengthy airplanes. And by the time the drink cart rolls to the back of the plane, you've reached altitude, and then you nose down, and you're heading in for landing for Penang. So they just let the drink cart roll back, and from the back of the plane to the front, and you grab what you want. I'm kidding a little bit, but it's about that fast of a flight, and we taxied for almost as long as we were airborne. But that's the way that getting a GURPS campaign could feel, because you needed to know so much to get started. And the thing is that the people who are left, right, playing GURPS, because it's not exactly a 10, 15, 20, 30% market share system, the people who are left have gotten past all of that. They know the book. They've been playing since 1982 or whatever, and they're experienced with it. And so they look at this as they've already gotten over that activation energy. And so they're bit. But what that means is that you never get new blood. And so what we wanted is something that we could use to say, hey, we're going to do this role playing game thing. Boom. Were you looking for you're looking, it's like the thing that, Rhodey said in Marvel, boom, you're looking for this. You really just want to be able to sit down and say, make a couple of choices and let's go play the game.
Like a drop down menu generator.
Yeah,
almost.
right, exactly. And it just doesn't need to be that complicated. And we turned a lot of the dised packages into something that was more like you pick two. And they had a bunch of stuff in them, but you could just play the words. You didn't have to play the mechanics.
Mhm.
Right? If you were a villain, you were a bully, you were callous, you kick people when they're down, but you were probably a coward. And if someone ever stands up to you, you're like going to squirrel off and hide. And so anyway, Saethor's Bane is a solo adventure in the choose your own adventure style. So you can do it by yourself. You can have someone who knows the rules run it while you play the characters, and it's a 4-person military unit. So you can also play it as a let's get to know the game. And you have someone running it. Maybe they know what they're doing, maybe they don't. You have each person playing a character, and you go through the scenario, and you're given relatively limited choices. But in each choice, I've sprinkled through GURPS mechanics. So if you have this particular ability, you can roll the dice, and that influences what choices you can go. And if you roll well, then you go this way, and if you roll well, and so it gives people a chance to shine, gives people a chance to get to know the skill system, and then every now and then you get to fight. And then when you fight, you break out the rules and you do the thing, and that's kind of where we are right now, is making sure that the number and quality of opponents that you're running into is appropriate given where you are in the progression. Because the other thing that I did with this one is that in D&D terms, you are leveling up, you are power leveling.
Mhm.
So you start the game at, I don't know, 3rd level or something. You're okay. You've got some stuff, and you're doing all right. But by the time you get to face Saethor, the Dark Lord, because of course there's got to be a Dark Lord, and Vivimancer Vorlock, because of course there's an evil sorcerer, and whatever it is they got going. And by the time you're there, you're 250, 300 points. It's like basically you're going from like 3rd level to 8th level in the course of, originally it was 28 pages. I think it's going to ship closer to 50.
Mhm.
Because first of all, the format got a little smaller. I'm older than I used to be, so I made the font bigger.
I feel that.
You mind if I pop up? Let me.
You can
show
now.
you.
Just so you know, we don't do anything with the video as far as
Okay, so
putting it out
that
there.
nobody will see it. All right.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, but I can show you, and you can audibly marvel at it because it is pretty cool. Let's see. Is that what it is? Share my screen. Share that. Oh, sure. Whatever. Go live. So you can sort of pop that open, and this is what it's turning into. But this is what it came from, right? So can you see
Okay.
this? So this was the original, relatively small font, black and white. This one is the fantasy trip version. But you can see here's the illustration of the earth elemental bursting into the cave. But this is what it's turning into.
Yeah, no, this looks, I mean,
right?
Yeah, this looks really, really like planned out, well done. You know, the art looks good. The layout, the formatting, everything is very, very clear, very easy to follow.
And friendly, right? It's bigger font. It's and so interestingly enough, the same artist I called the same art team. I said, "How would you like a second crack in color this time?" Because we hit the color stretch goal in the funding campaign. So you know, we had a certain, you know, if we get to $5,000, which God, if I can't, there's one campaign that I did in Brazil that didn't get to $5,000. It got to like 300 or $500 because that's a very difficult market to serve if you're an American. But most of my campaigns I can count on to get to 5 grand, and this one got there in less than 8 hours. But at 21,000, 400% funding, I said I will go through and re-engage the art team to make it full color, and that cost me a bunch of money in art, and it cost me a bunch of money in printing because color printing is 50 to 100% more expensive than black and white printing.
Hmm.
But I want color, and I think you want color. And once it hit color, there was, but so in any case, what this will allow you to do is to start off, and I have a very a fairly substantial intro. The intro got much longer because you know, we talk about the adventure, how to play, allies, record keeping, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that I added, new content in the Delvers to Go format where I talk about turning some of the races that are very fiddly point based into boom. If you want to play Catfolk, here's a 25-point Catfolk module. So
Hmm.
it eats up one of your choices, but it covers benefits. You've got dark vision, you've got claws, you're, I don't know, cute and fuzzy or something. You know, I've got a couple new, what I call them modules, right? 25 points of disads. Like, so for example, one of the old disads packages was called Disowned. Yeah, all of them were minus 25 points, which is half of the allotment that a starting DFRPG character can have. But Disowned had a very particular set of things, and so what I did was I took Disowned and I tweaked it, and so now I have something called Scandal Prone, right?
Okay.
So ignominy and embarrassment follow you like a cloud. You love to party, usually fail to restrain yourself from overly flirtatious behavior, and have poor impulse control. You've been run out of at least one town for drinking, fighting, and making free with folks who are not free to make with, right? So you're a lecherous cad, right? You love to party, you hit on the wrong people, and you're going to get run out of town on a rail because you make a pass at the Duke's wife, daughter, or pet. I don't know, whatever. Um, but I've tried, right? So I've tried to reflavor and add some of this. Like, for example, we were talking about fighting before. Here's another one, fabulous footwork. Your knack for positioning a weapon and body is such that you're rarely where the enemy can get a good shot in. Gods help you in an arrow storm, but with your weapon of choice in hand, you're immensely hard to hit. Enhanced dodge, enhanced parry, right? So you're right. So
Yeah,
that
that makes sense.
and it's very difficult to increase your dodge. It's one of your, sort of your fundamental things that you have to spend a lot of points on. So this does that all in one chunk. And parry is sort of the equivalent of 2 points in skill, but it allows you to focus on that a little bit more. Anyway, so there's a few, and now I'll talk about one or two more. One of them is called Dual Magnet. You're easy to read, too straightforward, and your personal code of ethics won't let you back down from a fight. Right? So you're the guy who's gonna get into that fight every time. Grim Reaper. While you fight like the soldier you used to be, you came from a company known for giving no quarter. The only enemies you don't have to worry about are dead ones, right? And that's gonna dictate your behavior. And then I have one because I can't resist pop culture references called "I Am the Law" for Judge Dredd, right? You believe that character is defined by what you do with either everyone watching or no one watching. You have a soldier's like regard for tactics and a firm command of what's fair and just. So, soldier's code of honor, honesty, which is kind of more law abiding, and impulsiveness, right? So, you're going to be the one who wades in to take action because, damn it, that's just not fair. And fair is fair. You remember the old movie? What the hell was it? The Legend of Billie Jean. Terrible movie.
I don't think
Good
I've
song.
seen it.
Pat Benatar singing, Pat Benatar rocking it out, Invincible. Best thing out of that movie was the theme song. But it had a lot of big name actors in a not great movie. Kind of like what Ash from Evil Dead. God, I can picture his face.
I know who you're talking about too, but I can't think of the name.
Campbell?
Yeah, Bruce Campbell.
Bruce Campbell. I keep thinking John Campbell, the science fiction editor, but no, Bruce Campbell. Like, if you look at you take a book by Michael Crichton, 3 or 4 Academy Award winners in script writing and acting, and you put them in a movie directed or financed by Steven Spielberg. How could you go wrong? Well, you just made Congo. So I'm sure that the script seemed compelling, but anyway, the point is about that was, fair is fair was the tagline that Billie Jean just kept using, and that's sort of that, by saying I am the law, you don't need to know the mechanics. Behave that way, and you'll earn yourself the points, right? Because you get points back for the disadvantage in powered by GURPS stuff. So yeah, so then you got the stuff and you get your equipment and you do your thing, and then you start at paragraph 1, and it's choose your own adventure from there out, and you can grow to effectively 2 or 3 times your starting point value by the time you're facing the Dark Lord. And so that becomes a playtest challenge because you need to make sure that each fight is appropriately kitted out for somewhere in the middle of what the capability level of the characters at that point can be.
Right.
So that's where I am right now. I have a feature complete. I'm starting to charge cards in 2 days. So the campaign funded, we made it to like almost $30,000 or about 25,000, as I recall. And once we get this sorted out and everything honed in, and a lot of this is going to be instead of 3 lizard folk, we may need to throw 5. Or we probably need a couple fewer minions here because between Chief Zurg and Thog the Ogre, those 2 are more than enough to threaten a couple of PCs at this point. So we maybe need lesser quality cannon fodder because Thog and Zurg are just too hard. But it's okay. So the trick though is that it's okay in a solo adventure like this to have a fight that's really hard. Because if you don't make it, then there's replay value and sort of can you find a different way? And we have do I have it here? No, because I sold out of all of them. I have an adventure called Dragon Hunt, which was designed to be a solo Dragon Slayer adventure, and David wrote it, and it's very good. It exists for TFT and Old School Essentials. I will probably bring it to GURPS eventually, but it was designed to be a one hero goes off hunting dragons, and we sent it around for playtest in the TFT version, which came first. And I'm starting to get this feedback. It's like I couldn't make it past the first encounter. I got so horribly killed, and I know that things are supposed to get harder from here out. So I'm like, try 2 characters. Try 2 of the 3 pre-generated characters. And I got back. I'm like, I made it farther, but I certainly didn't get past the second or third fight. I'm like, take all 3, and they're like, all right, that worked. but it was one of those things where I was like, wow, okay, this is so all of a sudden became a 3-person adventure. And interestingly enough, when I did Old School Essentials, it was really interesting because the big fight with the elder or ancient or old red dragon at the end, that's kind of the hero capping moment. I sat down and I mathed that out, and did some on paper plays. And the thing about the dragon in particular is that because you know what it does, the first thing it does if it wins initiative is fires off its breath weapon. And it was one of these things where that fight, interestingly enough, mostly didn't go past 2 or 3 rounds. Because either the party won initiative and they did enough damage to reduce the breath weapon power of the dragon to the point where the magic user didn't get offed, even if he failed the saving throw. So if you could hit the first and pile on a couple of attacks or the right end, and if the magic user could get off a spell, like a lightning bolt spell or something, where you're throwing out 8d6 damage for half, well, all of that reduces that first breath weapon of the dragon. And if the players won initiative and didn't let the thing take off, God forbid you let a flying creature like that go airborne, the fight was over in a couple of rounds. And if the dragon won, he targeted the spellcaster first because of course he does. He's intelligent. Neutralizes him, and then it's all over but the bleeding.
Well, you told me before you're now on Backerkit with this project, though?
Yeah. So I did Backerkit crowdfunding for this one. This is my second experience with it. It's much improved over the first time. It has some cool features. One of the things that Backerkit crowdfunding lets you do is you can get out with a pre-launch page early. Like you don't have like with Kickstarter, you typically have to fill out an entire campaign, submit it, get it approved, and by the time you're ready to get all those details in place, you're probably on a compressed time frame for when you need to launch it. So you can't really gin up followers to make your first day strong. You have to have done that beforehand with the non-product. So there's a bit of chicken and egg with Kickstarter that is made up for by and large with the size of the end of tail and Kickstarter because the networking effect of Kickstarter is much larger than Backerkit. Everybody is on Kickstarter. And when you fund and people are saying, yes, I back this, everyone gets the email and people are like, oh, well, this is a project that looks pretty cool. Let me try that too. And so they're in for $10 or they're in for $20, or maybe they go big. They're like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for all my life. Let me go big and get a box set or whatever. So, but Backerkit let me get out there faster with and that worked, right? I was able to, it was one of the first projects in a while that funded in the first day. My old school solos, the solo adventures that I'm talking about, converted to old school essentials, funded in an hour. That was a very successful project for me. Basically, that project paid for all of last year because last year, accounting wise, I lost about $1,000 on the year and paid myself nothing. Cash flow wise, I had money from the prior years from solo adventures and whatever, and I peanut butter spread that out so I was able to eat, so to speak. But last year didn't do it, right? It was the year before that that allowed me to get through to 2024. But yeah, so Saethor's Bane is in fight test. I've invited like 50 of my repeat backers plus my Patreon subscribers to come on board and see a reduced art copy that's feature complete. It's got even some of the hyperlinks working and fight it. See what happens. One person is all like, yes, 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 I want to do that. Some of my Patreon people are going to be running it over the next couple of days, and I'll probably get a lot more hits over the weekend. And I'll do my own thing. But as I said, like I like I've done this 3 times. I know what the choices are, right? I need fresh eyes to make sure that I'm not glossing over things that people won't get.
Well, there's the other thing, like with any creative endeavor, as the creator, you see it differently than a consumer.
Correct.
Just
Absolutely right.
with anything.
But yeah, so the nice thing about Backerkit is that Backerkit has always had a better pledge manager than Kickstarter, and having it be tightly integrated is kind of nice. And so I got to 80% survey completion in a matter of about a week, and so we'll start charging cards and people start getting their files and as my art comes in over the next 10 days or so, I'll get final layout in place and it'll start to. It's good looking now, and it will be really pretty by the time it's done. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I expect it to maybe even be as I don't know. We'll see what the art and the text flow looks like by the time that I get done. But it wouldn't surprise me if I mean already it's God. I hope there's a lot of blank pages there. No. Yeah, so it's already 50 some odd pages, and there's no art in it. So I've got like 11 pieces of art coming, and I've got a bunch of character art too, and so I it will not surprise me even a tiny bit if at the end of the day, this thing ships at 56, 60, 64 pages from an original published content of 28 or 32, depending on OSC or TFT. So it will double in size, and most of that is just the font is bigger, but also GURPS characters and are trait heavy. You can't just write fighter 5 hit dice. There's more to it, and so where a TFT or an OSE stat block might take up a column inch or two, a single NPC, like especially the bigger ones, Overlord Saethor, Vivimancer Vorlock, the Assassin, the King, those guys wind up taking a half a page. And so when you've got 20 or 25 unique creature types and maybe 40 unique creatures, because I have like 4 different lizard folk artwork, right? I've got 2 kind of I have them using staff slings, which I refer to as combat lacrosse. Whatever, right? So I've got a lot of good artwork coming in. There's going to be even more, and if you've ever wanted to get into GURPS or try it, and the activation energy has just been too hard. I've got a couple digital or physical pledge levels that have Steve Jackson Games is letting me sell the rules, which is cool. They're letting me sell some of their companions, but there's a digital jumpstart kit, which is the core DFRPG rules in PDF, the Delvers to Grow Omnibus Edition, which is 96 pages of content showing you how to make quickly one of the 12 professions of the dungeon fantasy role-playing game, and the adventure. And the digital jumpstart has a lot of add-ons. There's a Foundry VTT package, JPEG versions of the maps in case you want to drag them into your favorite VTT, non-Foundry tokens. So if you're a Roll20 person or a not Foundry, it's Roll20.
Fantasy Grounds is another
Fantasy
big one.
Grounds, that's one that I'm blanking on. Thank you. But if you do something else, Tabletop Simulator, Fantasy Grounds, Roll20, I have tokens. I have tokens of the artwork as well, and then finally, quick reference cards. I have these 4x5-inch formatted cards that you can either print yourself or I have them professionally printed. There's the guys who used to print the cards for Fantasy Flight are here in Minneapolis. And so I place my orders with them. They do small, short runs
Mm-hmm.
at 1/3 the price of the last time I did this in China.
Dang, that's
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah, I got robbed the first time I did cards because I did it at makeplayingcards.com or something, and that is not the way to go. That is absolutely not the way to go. It was the only place that did small quantities, but you're paying triple for it that you could at even other places in the US, which is not usual, but it's a hell of a lot faster. And when they're done, I drive to get them. I don't even have to worry about shipping. I just drive my car over and throw them in the back. But yeah, so that's Saethor's Bane. I leave late pledges open until I place physical orders for stuff, and that'll be probably a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's kind of what's going on right now. And I got a lot of stuff that I want to do in 2024.
Mm.
This is my second campaign already. I've already run and fulfilled the OSD conversion of Isle of Cedra, the books that I was showing you. So this is my, I'm it's March and I've run 2 campaigns already, completed almost 2 campaigns already. So my next one is probably going to be the fantasy trip. I have the neighboring island to the Cedra campaign, which is called Elazar, but I've got an adventure, a jammed adventure, and another solo in hand. I need to edit and produce and do that, but that's a campaign that I'll run. I'm doing the very first third-party full role-playing game that I think that no, all right, that's not entirely. Anyway, it's going to be a full dungeon fantasy role-playing game style focused. And when I say DFRPG style, what I mean is it's a complete game with all the parts that you don't need removed. Right. So instead of saying, "Oh, can my fantasy character take blaster pistol?" No, right. But all that right is gone.
It is the GURPS, the parts of GURPS you need for what you're doing, and none of the rest of it.
That is right. And the genre that I'm playing with, the game is tentatively called Mission X. It will probably ship with that title, but I reserve the right to change it to something cooler if I can think of it. But Mission X is XCOM. It is Stargate SG-1 or Stargate Atlantis. It is Scalzi's Old Man's War. It is some of the more interesting parts of Starship Troopers, book, movie, you recall, right? But it's go out into space, kill aliens and take their stuff, go on a bug hunt. Is this a stand-up fight or another bug hunt, sir? But I've rewritten a bunch of the mechanics to streamline things. And the people in my Patreon group have been running 3 different campaigns as I've been writing the rules to make sure that they work. And, they work. And so I'll be turning my hand once I'm done with Saethor's Bane. I will be turning my hand to getting that done. And again, with Backerkit, I can get a follow the campaign. I'm excited about this page up sooner.
Hmm.
And so I ought to be able to launch this bad boy, I would say somewhere around summertime, hopefully early
Cool.
summertime, having done a couple other things in the meantime. And so, but that's what the thing is, like, if I ever had a hit, like if I made a bunch, like it'd be one of these things where I could say, okay, I have all this stuff in front of me. I'm gonna farm these out to independent editors. I'm gonna do this one myself. I'm gonna bring this in, and it would just let me crank faster. There's only so much that I can do myself, and it would be great to be able to do more. And that's what having more working capital and having a success in the bank to plush that up. I can kind of struggle my way through 1.5 projects on my working capital, and then if I don't get paid, then I can't do another one. I got paid today, so the the Backerkit money from Saethor's Bane came in today, and so now I am capable of doing the next thing. I've already prepaid the art, right? The art, I don't have to. I paid all of my artists 100% in advance because this is a team that I've been working with in many cases since 2016. Not all of them. Pewter is new, but Rick Trula and Juan Ochoa worked with me on my very first book, Dungeon Grappling. They've worked with me on almost everything that I've done. I published 50 books now, over like 50 books over the course of 2022 crowdfunding campaigns.
Hmm.
So, there's been a lot. I've been relatively prolific in the 5 or 6 years that I've been up and running. So I'm very pleased with the artwork that's coming in, and I don't need to withhold money from these guys to guarantee that they deliver. They're going to deliver, and they're going to deliver great.
Hmm.
And they reward my faith in them with fantastic artwork. So it's win-win.
Well, I gotta say, it sounds like Sathor's Bane sounds really cool. It sounds like because I've always said that I think GURPS for me is a system that if I dove into it deep enough to understand it, I would probably really like it. But that's a bit of a dive, and for someone who goes as many directions as I do gaming wise,
Right.
that's a big chunk of and like I said, I'm not saying that as a knock. It's just like you said,
No, it's 100%. I
it's
know
it's
where
a
you're going
very
with this. I agree.
front-loaded system mastery game, and I feel like what I've heard from you and others is it is very rewarding once you achieve that level.
Right. And the thing is that it's a very circular in a good way. It's got a very strong positive reinforcement feedback. You do the work to make your first character, you play the game, you're like, "Oh, I can do all this cool stuff. This is amazing." And then you dig in more and say, "Well, what else is there?" But yeah, so it becomes a virtuous cycle where the more you can get into it, but what it doesn't have, it used to have, see, it used to have an intro solo called All in a Night's Work, which is a solo adventure for in a fantasy genre where you played a single character, Die Blackthorn. But that was, I believe, removed from the fourth edition basic set to make room for the Infinite Worlds campaign framework. It's not really a campaign setting; it's a framework for a setting. And this got into one of the issues, which is that for people new to the game, GURPS actually is a game construction kit. It's not really a game that you can just go out and play. You have to build your thing, throw away the things that aren't the statue. If you've heard that analogy before, right? Sculpting is removing everything other than the art. So you have to remove all the things that aren't what your campaign is, and then you go play that. By the time you've done that, the squirrels in your group are like, squirrel, right? So they're off something else, and can't we just play?
I are one.
Or you are the squirrels, right? Or can't we just freaking play D&D? Sit down and play D&D, right? Because everyone can plop down everyone can just plop down their copy of the Player's Handbook or the Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy Tome, and roll up a character, and you're playing in 10 minutes or 20 minutes. You can mostly do that with a fantasy trip too, mostly.
Well, but like I said, I think this is really cool. I
Yeah,
hope, some people back you on this, pick it up, find something they really love. Because, and the thing that I say this all the time, but the one thing I love about talking to small creators like yourself is just the passion for what you're doing. And it's like I get the sense in a lot of ways that a lot of this stuff you're creating because you want to play it. You just want someone else to play it too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. One of the things that I get to do as a fan of the system and a creator of the system is I get to look out at the corpus of what's out there and say, what's not there that I really want there? And then I talk to Steve and Sean and the licensing folks and say, I want to do this. And they by and large say, okay, go do that. And that's how the big hardcover GURPS bestiary, which I'm waving in front of the camera that nobody can see it but us. But this is in large part, I would say at least 2/3 of this are totally not monsters from that other game converted to. I even have a thing on page 25 called "By Any Other Name," which is a substantial list of the Norse-ish names that are the monsters in my Norse-ish, Viking-ish setting. But like like the Logaskugi, if you look that up, it's totally not a Balrog, right? The Grimdar is totally not a Pit Fiend. The what do I call it? Blathakona, the Queen of Blades, is totally not a Marilith demon. The Ganglaetha, the tunnel lizards are totally not kobolds. So you get a lot of totally not, right? And then there's a whole bunch of other things where I don't need to rename a cave bear or a cat or a wolf. Those are what they are. And so a whole bunch of this book, if not almost everything. There are a couple things that are I think they're found now, but like this guy here, the Elerkotter, the Yule
Mhm.
cat, has made an appearance. It's a bit of Icelandic or Scandinavian folklore where if on feast day you weren't wearing clean clothes, the Yule cat would come and eat you. And there was lore behind that, the same way that vampires are sort of either disease or sexuality, as in terms of when that goes wrong, the Elerkotter was ingratitude and slovenliness. But specifically in the peasantry, because of course the nobles could afford clean clothes, so it was kind of a weird, a bit of interesting bit of folklore. But it's this giant predatory fairy beast, and that made it in here because it was just cool, too cool not to. But I was like, people have been talking since 2004 about, oh, GURPS doesn't have a real bestiary. They have many small bestiaries, but nothing you could block a door with. And so I'm like, well, I think we need one. And so that one's been my highest backed Dungeon Fantasy role playing campaign to date at 685 people. But honestly, that should have been 1,385 people. Everyone who plays the DFRPG and GURPS in the fantasy genre should want this book. And I think that the reason why they probably don't is they're like, oh, I don't do Norse settings, but I have to do Norse setting. Not because it's personally important to me, because the deal that I have with Steve Jackson Games for this particular thing is I can do whatever I want as long as it's within the context of my Nordland setting. So that way, if there's any overlap that ever, we want to do something like this, but a little different, we can have, they can coexist.
Mhm.
But anyone who wants ready-made monsters for anything in the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, or just for fourth edition, like if you're playing a Monster Hunter game in modern stuff with guns, there's no reason why you can't use monsters out of this, and they're ready to go. Not only are they ready to go, but they have foundry actors to them. You can just drag them into your game if you use it.
You do the classic DM trick of it's not called that, it doesn't look like that.
That's
That's just
exactly
the stuff
right.
like I'm using.
No, that's exactly right, and that's precisely right. And just because the Aetherlaus, the Restless, right? This is a mummy, and it's listed as a mummy on page 25, but it's a kung fu mummy. These guys are actually
Uh,
kind of fun. Like instead of the shambling guy, these guys are like expert warriors from beyond the grave. My bloodthirsty, my totally not vampire is actually a lot of fun. So this was something that was inspired a little bit by the Dresden Files books,
okay.
where this shadow is animated,
Ah.
and so the shadow is its own. It's connected to the vampire itself, but they can yeah. So it's a different kind of take on a vampire. So that was actually kind of unique to me. That's a unique creature that borrows from a lot of different places, inspired by a few things, but it's absolutely kind of fun. And so there's a lot going on in this one that makes some sense, and it's not just for people who are in Viking settings. And so I think that misleads some people. And I had things down. I want people to play in my Viking setting. The Vikings are a great group of people that are kind of the OG RPG party, right? Their classic mythology on what makes a valuable person who is worthy of praise is, get in a boat, go out raiding, kill people, take their stuff, and bring back loot, treasure, and slaves. We don't do the slavery thing because this is 2024. But the loot and the treasure and killing monsters and taking their stuff, absolutely. And so it made a very kind of, hey, if because you get into it a little bit, you say, well, what kind of a society would it look like? It could it even exist if you have a adventuring party that would go out in search of treasure and kill things and take their stuff? Well, how and you and I talked about this a little bit before the show. Well, how bogus is that? No real world. Oh, yeah, except for the ones that did. Like, right? Like like the sagas of the Vikings, and 90% of those guys were farmers, right? Viking was not a culture; it was a job. A raider, the Bay, the Vik in Viking, I think it's the same Vik as Reykjavik, which means bay, right? In Icelandic, in Old Norse. So these are the people who went into the bay and killed things and took their stuff, and it wasn't a ton of them, but they got the stories, right? They got to write the cool stories about them, and that's kind of the same milieu that we're in with role-playing games. There aren't a ton of adventurers kicking around. Not everyone does that, but the few
Right.
that do get the stories told about them, and
Right.
and that's adventure gaming. And as a culture that embraced that, it's an easy home for telling adventure stories when you have a culture that you don't have to do much to have it embracing the tropes that D&D or the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game or fantasy role playing game in general tend to throw at you.
Yeah, I have a feeling you and I could sit here and talk about this all night. And I think maybe what I'd like to do at some point, because you do have this Norse-based setting,
Sure.
maybe get you to come back on at some point and we can have a talk around using historical inspiration.
I would totally dig that. Yeah, absolutely.
Because not to be whatever, but my day starts way too damn early in the
Right.
morning.
Right.
And so if we sit here and talk as long as we could,
Yeah. No,
I
you'd
would
be you would be the mummy, the zombie the next day. We cast summon Steve. Yeah, I can absolutely let you go, and we can. I certainly, I'm always happy to come back and talk gaming. So
Yeah, yeah. No, no, absolutely. Like I said, I don't mean to cut you off or anything, but,
no, not at
it's
all.
just one of those. I do wanna, though, give you a second, you mentioned a Patreon. I know you have a website. Any place people can go to, check up on what projects you have on Backerkit or whatever.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter or X. I'm on Facebook. Gaming Ballistic has a Facebook group. That's a pretty good place to look. I occasionally post on Reddit. Facebook is probably the best. Discord. And I do have a blog, gamingballistic.com. And you can find Gaming Ballistic on both Backerkit crowdfunding and, of course, Kickstarter. Most of my projects have been on Kickstarter. I will probably return to Kickstarter back and forth, right?
Mhm.
Projects that are ready to just go and don't need a lot of runway, I will probably use Kickstarter. Anyway, long story less long on this one is yeah, mostly if you look for gamingballistic.com, like my Shopify site is gaming-ballistic.myshopify.com. And and I have a Gaming Ballistic Discord that I can throw an invite to for people who are interested. Right now it's a relatively small but really good, welcoming group of people, and I'm over 50. I don't need to put up with stuff, right? If I need to herd cats, and anyway, so it's a very friendly group, and people are either respectful or they leave or are asked to leave. So it's a
That's
very
very cool.
welcoming. It's a very welcoming group, and there's people there. Obviously, they play GURPS, they play TFT. Some people are there for my Dragon Heresy or OSE stuff, but I'd rather have good gaming session in whatever system than evangelize for one thing that no one's playing. So, see, it's the social thing for me.
So I think with that, let's do a little bit of Game of the Week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
So, would you like me to go ahead and talk
Yes,
about
please
mine a little bit
start
first?
because I need to invent something.
All right. So, my game of the week this week, and I'll drop a link in our green room if you want to check it out. Except I was not on the right screen when I hit return. Uh, there we go. Um, Look, you've heard us mention it a couple times. You've probably seen it around. RPG freelancer Owen Casey Stevens, who you have probably played something he worked on because let's see, 4 editions of D&D, both editions of Pathfinder, assorted supplements from I don't know how many publishers: Call of Cthulhu, D20 Modern, Dragon Age, Fantasy Age, Gamma World, Song of Ice and Fire, Wheel of Time, ran Starfinder, ran Star Wars Saga Edition, and the list goes on, right? He's worked on tons and tons of stuff. You heard him, we had him on the show a while back to talk about the OGL and actually what it kind of meant to the development of the gaming industry and everything. Well, Owen is fighting cancer. And thus far, it's not something they can deal with surgically. Chemo didn't do the job, so now they're doing radiation. Well, also, as someone who has made a living doing freelance RPG work, you can guess his health package is not the greatest. So bills, bills, more bills. You know, there's been GoFundMe's, there's been whatever. Well, still, these. I mean, look, anyone who's lives in modern United States of America knows medical costs are just sky high. So a bunch of different publishers, and I mean, we're talking a list of 20 plus publishers, have put together a bundle on Drive-Thru. Drive-Thru has actually reduced their cut that they normally take out of these, put together this huge bundle. The combined normal value of this bundle is over $1,000. Cost of the bundle is $30. It's called the Owen Casey Stevens' Rad Bundle. It doesn't even list how many games there are, and I'm not going to try and count it. But Drive-Thru is only taking a 10% cut out of it. And I don't know exactly what their normal cut is, but I know it's quite a bit higher than that. And so, literally, $27 from every bundle is going to Owen to help him pay for his medical bills. And again, I've only interacted with Owen a little bit, in setting up, having him come on the show, talking to him on the show. But I have talked to a lot of people in the industry, and no one has a bad word to say about Owen. He's just a genuinely nice guy, cares about other creators, cares about the hobby. So yeah, check this bundle out. There's literally stuff from, I see several names I recognize, Fat Goblin, Nerd Burger Games, Rob Schwab's got some stuff in here, Schwab Entertainment. And like I said, it's got to be at least 20 publishers here. Bane, just to help somebody out who's just a really good guy in the business. So check that out. It's the Owen Casey Stevens' Rad Bundle, and that's my suggestion for the week.
That's a good suggestion.
And it's supplements for freaking everything.
Right. So I'm gonna go to one of my favorite. I've played in the Gumshoe system, but I've never actually played a game of Night's Black Agents. But I love Night's Black Agents by Ken Hite, and it's in the Gumshoe system. But I believe that it's a game that everyone who wants to run a campaign with secret societies or layers of mystery should own and read
Yes.
because it's between the Conspiramid and some really great advice about where the touch points are for mystery or investigation type stories, what you want to show the players, what you want to hide for players, like what is it that it's a really great for anyone who is looking to make content or to bring content in front of your gaming group or buyers or whomever. It's just chock full of goodness, and it's relatively rules light, almost too rules light, but it's something that really leans into its premise, which is that you are the main cast of a vampire hunting mercenary TV show,
Well,
and you're go ahead.
I was going to say, I've heard Ken describe it as Jason Bourne plus vampires.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the nutshell. But I want to make the next point, which is Jason Bourne plus vampires, both true, but the way that the rules work are your mode of operation is screen time, because every test in it is a 1d6, 4 or higher wins. And you can spend your pool of points and then refresh later to lean on any particular test. But once they're gone for that game session or until you and it took me a while to realize that what you had on your character sheet was spotlight time and not skill.
Yeah, I was going to say I have not played NBA. I
Right.
have played another
Right.
gumshoe game.
Yeah. I played Trail of Cthulhu myself, but yeah.
See, we played the superheroes one, Mutant City Blues.
Oh, interesting. I was not aware.
Yeah, it's supers meets cop procedural.
Yeah. Right.
But what I realized is Gumshoe is not a great do everything system. Gumshoe is amazing for investigative
Yes.
drama
Right.
and a little bit of action.
And because it's so good in that, the advice that it gives you does not depend, because there are so few mechanics. The advice that it gives you on how to set it up, what consists of how to get people to bite onto an investigation game that is either resolved with Old Man Withers or a furious gunfight against vampires. The advice that it gives you is like gold plated. And so of any game that I recommend, I'm like, everybody who does anything involving investigation should have and read and either consciously accept or consciously reject, because not everything that it says may be suited to what you do, but everything in it is well considered. And then you need to consider it well whether or not you're going to do it, but you should read it. It's one of those things where you learn cool stuff by simply reading the material.
Kenneth Haidt, Robin D. Laws, and Gareth Ryder Hanrahan.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah. I should mention in passing, coming back to an original thing, Ken Haidt was the original editor of Dragon Heresy. Because I knew Ken from a few of my early blog career, and I interviewed him at least once. And the secret to, much like the secret to Jane Cobb dealing with anything is to hand him a stick and sit back. The secret to interviewing Ken Haidt is to ask him one question and then shut up for 2 hours. And he will just talk, and it will be interesting.
I will tell you this,
Yeah.
Ken Haidt is scary to play this game with, because no matter what game you pick for the game of the week, Ken Haidt knows more about it than you do.
Yeah, no, he's very erudite. And anyway, so he was my original editor, and he gave me some advice that I was not able to take at the time that I have since embraced about. He called it moral cowardice in game design. But what he was basically saying is like, don't take your vision and shave off the cool bits so that you think it'll be more popular. Just do your thing, and if it's popular, great. But you'll be more satisfied with it if you embrace the full potential of whatever it is you're trying to create. And I didn't do that as much as I would have liked in Dragon Heresy. Although I may revisit Dragon Heresy. There's a lot there that I've learned from, and I think the audience would be more receptive to it. But another time for that.
Yeah, well, I think though that's a fabulous bit of advice to close on, to just do what you think is cool and be happy with it. So I guess with that, like I said, I thank you very much for coming and taking the time to chat and talk about all this stuff. And we'll have to get you back on again to talk more, because you fit entirely too much into our rambling conversation type deal here. But yeah, so thank you very much for taking the time, folks. Go check out gamingballistics.com. I think you said, or is it .net?
Gamingballistic.com.
Okay, gamingballistic.com. Like I said, there'll be links to all this stuff down in the show notes. With that, like I said, just want to say thank you again to Doug, and remind everyone out there to be kind to each other and get out there and play some RPGs.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast, on Discord at Me and Steve RPGs, and as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.